Hello, listeners. Welcome back to yet another episode of the Digital Adoption Show, Season 2. I'm Tamana from WhatFix, and I'm sure you must be wondering what is this episode all about? We thought that let's bring someone who's the heart and soul of any organization. If you guess me right, it's the customers. So we thought that for this episode, we'll bring someone who's actually our customer and they talk about what kind of L&D strategies they have been using. Season 2, Episode 2 features Erika Van De Yacht, who's the Associate Director Corporate Learning at Sentry Insurance, who would be hosted by Sumit Kumar, who's the Vice President Strategic Accounts at WhatFix. Let's see what they have in store for us.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, listeners, and welcome to this edition of Digital Adoption Podcast. I am Sumit Kumar, your host for today. I'm a sales leader at WhatFix, a digital adoption platform, which is a new category of software. Think of us as a layer, an experience layer on top of your applications and digital interfaces that helps users of all kinds, internal, external, customers, partners, distributors, and so on, complete their workflows productively and efficiently, all in the flow of work, and you are learning while you are doing work. We have a very exciting podcast and show today. So let me start by introducing you to our speaker for today, Erika Van De Yacht. She's Associate Director of Corporate Learning at Sentry Insurance. Hi, Erika. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Hi, thank you for having me. I am doing great and excited to join the conversation today.
Very well. I wanted to make sure that I pronounced your name correctly. Looks like I did. I feel a lot better.
You did well. Yes, it's Erika Van De Yacht.
All right. Excellent. So, Erika, before I go into the topic of today's podcast, I think it'll be good that we get your introduction so that listeners know who you are. So why don't you briefly explain who you are, what your role is at Sentry Insurance, while giving a little bit about the company as well. Over to you.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So a little bit about me, as you mentioned, I work for Sentry Insurance, and in particular, I work in what we call Sentry University, which is the name of our corporate learning and function at Sentry Insurance. Sentry is a mutual insurance company based in Wisconsin, and we have offices across the United States. And we specialize in business insurance, but we also have some personal insurance products. And kind of a little unique aspect about us, while that is certainly our primary business, we actually also operate a destination golf course. Golf is quite important to us. It's so important that we sponsor the PGA Sentry Tournament of Champions, which was just in Maui earlier this month. And we are excited to host the 2023 Senior PGA Tour as well. So as important as it is to kind of share what we do, I also want to take a moment to talk about what we value, or kind of how we go about our business. And I'd say at the center of who we are is conversation. So from a business side, we really pride ourselves in engaging our customers in quality conversations and listening to their unique challenges and goals. And for me, that works out great. As a learning leader in the organization, I'm quite fortunate because I often think, is there a better framework for your organization to be founded on than conversation, right? We can take that business focus and translate that directly into our culture and our relationships with each other and our communities, which is a great thing to be part of.
No, that's fantastic. I think this is going to tie very well to the topic of today's podcast, which I'm going to introduce shortly. But what fun, a golf course close to the business. I'm sure employees making good use of it, and your customers and your partners. So that's awesome.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I have. Ever since joining Sentry 5 years ago, I've tried to up my golf game. It can be a little intimidating having a golf course across the street from your corporate building. Like, I better get better at this.
Very good. Yeah. Fantastic. You mentioned Sentry University. I'm a little curious. What is Sentry University? Why did your leadership go this route and establish it? So, can you talk briefly about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So Sentry University, or we tend to call it Sentry U for short, is our centralized learning function that we created about 5 years ago. So it's about 100-year-old company. So comparatively, it's a pretty new department. But it really was the vision of our CEO and our executive leaders to invest in learning in a new way. And formerly had been more of a decentralized learning function, and really not only brought our training and learning functions from across the organization together under one umbrella, but also went about learning in a new way. In fact, our university tagline is "Welcome to a New Way of Learning," which I'd say has been quite successful. It earned us a Brandon Hall Gold Award in 2019 for best launch of a corporate university. But to kind of expand on that a little bit, what is a new way of learning? What does that mean for us? Today, we offer, I think, a diverse mix of learning experiences that range from, yes, the instructor-led, but also innovative self-study, blended formats, or even a little bit of virtual reality. And even a small portion of our work is what we call personal development, which are learning experiences that we offer sometimes outside of business hours, but with the idea of we also want to develop our associates as whole people. So we've offered things like how to make sushi for your family, or learn the basics of golf or dinner etiquette, in ways that build the skills that you can use, in your non-work life. But we also want to use learning as a resource for social connection and building networks across the organization. And we just really want to learn for the joy of learning. So there's kind of some fresh takes that we've taken on learning in the last few years.
Sounds very interesting, and I'm trying to relate it to what we did at WhatFix last 1 or 2 years during the pandemic, is to have that social connection through new learning experiences. Once it was like a water, fluid painting class. Another time was how to make a pizza where everybody came together. So it's not only technical training, it's not only soft skills training, but it fostered that connection, that communication, that collaboration and teamwork. So I really get it, and seems like a very good idea, from a Sentry business perspective, to centralize the function. So this is fantastic foundation for today's podcast. Let me now introduce the topic for today. I'll set a little backdrop, and then we'll go into some questions for you. So the topic for today is accelerating L&D's impact through a business driven model. Give me 1 second. I actually lost something. Sorry, screen just blanked. So if you actually think about it, there is more and more of a shift happening to digital knowledge-based economy, which means that a vibrant workforce is more important than ever. And if you look at research, it also suggests that a very significant percentage of market cap in large public companies is based on intangible assets, skilled employees, exceptional leaders, and knowledge. These trends have only elevated the importance of learning and development function, and then how it's impacting today's business and today's companies. So I think that's the backdrop to the topic, accelerating L&D impact through a business-driven learning model. With that, let me fire away and kickstart the podcast from a question perspective. First question is, learning and development is no longer just another function for the company, but it plays an integral role in achieving business goals. What is your opinion on this, Erika?
Well, I think your introduction queued this up very well, and I would add to what you just shared. I think it's Peter Senge who said, "The rate at which an organization learns may become the only sustainable source of competitive advantage." And ever since I read that quote, it has stuck with me. And similar, I think, to what you just shared is between our digital knowledge-based economy and the pace at which our world is changing, and I would say changing with rising complexity, many skills seem to have this increasingly shorter half-life, which certainly, makes on the surface makes continuous learning and development just a necessity in achieving enterprise goals. But one thing you'll probably hear me mention a couple times throughout this podcast, I'm going to guess, is that it's not just learning that has become integral, but learning in new ways, right? Things are changing so fast that if we stick to the quote unquote kind of traditional ways of learning, I don't know if we'll keep up. So like that Peter Senge quote, if the rate at which we learn is a differentiator, then I think we have to have the culture and the environment that supports continuous learning. And that learning, I think, in today's era means that it usually needs to happen within the business and in the flow of work. And so where it makes sense, that we need learning to be embedded or woven into the day-to-day experience of our associates, whether it is through systems or people that can coach and support in a moment of need and very nimbly sustain behavior change over time.
Very well, Erika. You talked about new ways of learning of work, and WhatFix is a platform which enables that as well. Do you have one example which you folks have recently leveraged in one of your business lines where it's a new way of learning, again, to share with our audience? Anything which comes to your mind?
Yes, we have leveraged WhatFix in a couple of different places and are looking at where else can we leverage it, because it has been such a successful tool in exactly what I just described. We know from a learning perspective that it just doesn't have impact to have people go sit in a room and, just kind of have a one-way absorption of content for hours, and they get back to the work environment and don't retain. Or in today's challenging labor market, it's hard to get, a lot of companies are short-staffed right now. So even trying to get people away from their work, so to speak, to attend a learning experience is pretty challenging. So we have found probably our most success and our most value in leveraging WhatFix, certainly in, large software rollouts where we have a large audience, large portion of our organization that needs to learn a new system or tool, but also in those areas that tend to perhaps have, higher turnover and where we already have a higher volume of our learning investments focused. In that, previously it was a multiple week classroom-based learning experience. And now we can shorten that, improve their experience, and actually get them to proficiency and on the job more quickly because we have that learning within the flow of work woven right into their day-to-day.
Erika, when I first met you, close to 2 months ago, when we started talking about, hosting you on the podcast and getting prepared, obviously the New Year's and the end of the year slowed it down. You were talking about designing a business-aligned and business-driven strategic learning plan. Now, every business has their strategy, their challenges, their needs, and L&D, would need to support those. I was wondering if you want to pick any examples to share from the lines of business you and your team support at Sentry today and talk about it.
Sure. So our corporate university supports, the broad professional and leadership development needs of our organization, as I would anticipate most L&D functions likely do. But we also support at the business unit level. So whether it's claims, sales, underwriting, customer service, or even our hospitality business. So that's where the golf course is part of our hospitality business. In all of those, we have very close relationships and alignment between our top leaders and the learning function. to assure we're working on the right things from a business perspective. So I guess I would take the opportunity to emphasize here is not just who we serve, but really how we partner. And I think we have what I call maybe like a cross-section of ways that we assure our learning aligns closely with business needs. So for example, we have a clearly defined governance structure for our corporate university that essentially aligns our top leaders with our learning leaders to assure that our corporate university is working on what is most important for our business strategy. Second, the other aspect that I've really appreciated since joining Sentry is that much of our learning function is actually comprised of associates from the business. So that connection and the credibility and just the conversation about what's most important, I think just naturally gets strengthened or maybe even accelerated. And then, we build on those relationships through that regular cadence of meetings and conversations that start at the executive level to plan and prioritize how we invest in our learning resources. So we serve a lot of groups across the organization, but it's really that top leadership support that I think is a differentiator in making us successful.
Very good. One interesting follow-up question which I have for you is you talked about the governance structure. So, is there a regular cadence which you have with your business leaders and business stakeholders where you meet regularly? And, just thinking start of the year, so you probably met with the businesses you support, call it, late Q4 calendar year, and talked about what are the learning needs of the organization, what are the business priorities for next 12 months, and so on. So can you talk a little bit about how do you go about that governance and that planning process at a high level?
Sure. So our corporate university is structured almost like an HR business partner model. An HR business partner that typically is aligned with a business unit or an executive leader. Our learning function is very similar in that our learning leaders are aligned not just to business units, but to a chief level leader. So they have their own connection, usually one-on-ones, their own direct relationship between the learning leader and the executive leader. But then each group, kind of each major business unit has what we call steering committees. So it's the chief level leader and usually their direct reports, and they're connecting with their learning leader on a regular cadence. That varies, by business unit of how frequent it is. But I would say at least quarterly, sometimes more, sometimes less in other areas, sometimes a few times a quarter of where, the conversation is coming together. Here's what we're working on delivering for you. Here's where we think we need to go in the upcoming months. And what else is is coming up? What else are we hearing? What else is on our radar? What other requests have we maybe gotten or heard from the business since we met last? And then it's really that executive team that is saying, okay, yep, we're hearing this and we're hearing that. And out of all the kind of the capacity and the resources we have, learning here is where we want you to focus your efforts. So that's a lot of the conversation. So we know what we're working on. And then certainly that governance structure and those conversations are very helpful when it's time to actually roll out learning, and that we have that support and reinforcement and leadership kind of engagement around our learning as well.
It makes a lot of sense. Seems like you're very tightly integrated with business, and there is a continuous, engagement throughout the year. Again, I'm just trying to relate it to my experiences. So, I'm part of the sales team, and we have a sales enablement team which helps us, and we meet them regularly on a quarterly basis. We talk about what is our expected hire plan, how many people are going to onboard, how many leaders are actually joining the organization who will have some people management skills, or if anyone is getting promoted, et cetera, and then also tweak as we, introduce more and more newer products. So that sales enablement team is always side by side, listening to us, pivoting as required, and it's a continuous engagement. So I can see, at a much larger play, you are almost 43 to 4,400 employees. We are still a small company, but the processes and frameworks are very similar. So again, very, very good to know how you do it. Just one other thing before I talk about something else. At any given point of time, what is the mix of projects you have from businesses? Because it's leadership training, it's soft skills for employees. You talked about some technical projects or competency-based training. So what's the mix of projects you have, and any specific area which makes you excited, or call it one of your favorites to focus on from a personal perspective?
Oh, that's a good question. The first thing that comes to mind at any given time, our team is often juggling about 180 projects at a time. And I would say actually the larger majority of our learning team, probably more of those efforts are focused on business specific learning. So our learning team is actually broken into our learning leaders and our learning performance specialists who work closely with the business. We have our instructional designers, and of course we have our very important team who helps manage our learning solutions and our LMS and so on. And so much of that work between the learning leaders and the learning performance specialists who work more closely with the business, I'd have to look at the exact breakdown, but it's probably 2/3, 3/4, of that team is focused specifically on business related efforts. So whether it might be that we're rolling out a new insurance product, and so our sales folks not only need education on what it is, but they may need also how do you introduce this to a customer? What's the communication strategy around it? How do you overcome objections? Those types of things. So it's really a mix. Of course, my space and my background is in professional and leadership development. So that's really what my direct team focuses on. And so we get to interact with the entire organization, which I really enjoy. I think my favorite project, I would say, which is in the works, but one I'm really excited about, is looking at our accelerated leadership development program. So how are we taking future successors in our organization and assuring that not only their development is moving in the right direction for their potential future roles, but how are we truly accelerating their development? So if they did nothing else, a year from now, do we truly have them in a new place that they wouldn't have been otherwise, absent the learning experiences? So that's one that's in the works, but we're really excited for this year. So I think it connects both back to my favorite topic of leadership development, but also how we in turn helping the business prepare for the future.
That's very, very good to know. Thank you for that. So we talked about learning and development, supporting a business and business needs. And it plays a pivotal role, like we talked about, in scaling a business and making sure it's successful. I'm just going to flip the coin a little bit. I was recently reading a study from Deloitte, which says 22% of executives believe that their companies, only 22, I'm highlighting only 22, believe that their companies are outstanding at creating a differentiated employee learning experience. Have you encountered a situation where a business leader was not bought into the idea of L&D driven business outcome or outcomes? And what do you say to those leaders?
Okay, well, I'd say I have a two-part answer in terms of what's made that successful, and probably likely where, I don't think today, but just part of our journey over the last 5 years has been influencing leaders and associates to a stronger 70-20-10 framework in our learning and moving away from the traditional classroom base, that in order for people to learn, they have to sit in the classroom. So that's what comes to mind. I'd say the two ways that we have influenced that or kind of overcome that is is first, it makes me think of some of the leaders within our learning function who came from the business. So the lens that they've brought into learning is certainly priceless, because they can speak the language of the business, they understand the concerns, they understand, if you have a salesperson who's on the road much of their time, how are we adjusting learning to actually make it work for them? And it's actually there in the moment of need. And so having their lens and bringing in people from the business as part of the learning function, I think has been important for that. In fact, our executives are often involved in that selection process. Like when I interviewed for my job, I actually interviewed with one of our chief officers who oversees one of our revenue generating business areas. So I think having their buy-in in different ways and them seeing folks from their business that you're involved in selecting helps kind of proactively minimize that, because there's already a foundation of trust and a relationship. And, the second answer, I think it's just being patient. I don't know if that's a whole or complete answer, but showing up to the table and being ready to listen and ask really good questions and kind of just patiently wade through the ambiguity and the uncertainty around, wait, you want to do this differently. Why? But doesn't classroom-based learning work better? And honestly, I think what we saw at Sentry is we just had a little bit of impact here and there. And we had one advocate here and there to say, this new way really worked in my business area. And it kind of just, the information, the news just kind of spread on the organization and helped us build credibility in that way.
So I think that's really good advice. Again, thank you for sharing that. I think, citing a role model who has moved from, call it business into L&D function always helps. And I think patience is a virtue. And with time, I think people see the benefits. So really good advice for our listening audience. Actually, my next question was sort of you've already answered. You talked about that you have people with prior business background who rotate or spend some time within the L&D organization. Again, I was thinking about another L&D leader I spoke with in the last 6 months or so, where they talked about in their organization, delivery folks and professional services folks coming and spending some time in the L&D organization. Or there are people who went out for certification in instructional design. They came back. They were actually not part of L&D, but they were looking at certification and looking at this as an area and spending time on a special project, and then eventually moving to L&D, which really helped with business people coming into L&D. Outside of business people and kind of examples I gave, is there anything else which you are doing at Sentry? Insurance to enable your L&D associates and your trainers to know more about the challenges and the objectives and really knowing the business. Anything else which comes to mind outside of rotating people, which is helping with enablement of your L&D associates and trainers?
Yeah, as you mentioned, that has been a very successful practice of bringing associates from the business into our learning function. And as you mentioned, for some of them, they'll likely return to working within the business later in their career, right? So working, and I think you used the word rotation, working in the corporate university, for some will have been somewhat like a rotation for them, which, of course, I'm biased as an L&D leader, but I do think having a few years of experience within the learning function will give them a unique skill set as future business leaders. And being part of learning helps you gain a little bit different insight into what drives behavior change and change management, and certainly talent development, which of course are very important skills as they continue their careers back in the business. So we've found a lot of success from that model. And then to the second part of your question around how we help our associates kind of continue to develop that knowledge. And once they are in the learning function, to stay engaged with the leadership teams, with the business. We've outlined our learning function kind of by revenue generating areas, kind of our corporate areas, and then our learning solutions team. And we do that so even the areas that specialize within different functions under revenue generating are still coming together and have this very intentional kind of process for sharing what they're working on, sharing their insights, helping others connect and build relationships across the organization, or just sharing to say, oh, wait, you're working on this? I know someone over here that I can connect you with. We also have a very, we're especially digging into this year, building a more in-depth process for team-based feedback on our learning initiatives, so that not only are you, as you more kind of with the more agility, sharing what you're working on with your team, but very quickly kind of sharing information about what's going on in other areas of the business, so that collectively as the learning function, we're sharing knowledge across the learning team.
So it looks like the environment there is, very open, very team-oriented, very collaborative. There is good
Yes.
Engagement, and you already touched upon the governance model. L&D seems to be in very close touch with business. So all very good inputs. I'm going to ask you one more question, and then we'll move to a interesting part of the podcast, which is rapid fire. But let me ask you one more question,
right.
keeping a track of time. I'm looking back at the last 1.5, 2 years of pandemic. Companies are facing a very tight labor market. You have great resignation taking place, or is sort of in play. So voice of employee or employee experience is as important as improving, call it customer service and customer experience. The pandemic is forcing us to look at different ways, new ways of learning. You talked about that. So what would you say are one or two of your key learnings you want to share from the past year and a half, where your department or L&D function at Sentry had to pivot and continue to provide the expected level of support to your internal business units? Because now you've suddenly moved virtual, no classroom things. So any one or two learnings you want to share from past 1 year?
Sure. The first thing that comes to mind is we kind of had some lessons in things don't have to be perfect to roll them out. And our former senior director, who's now retired, but used to always tell us, don't let great get in the way of good. And I think that was something we learned of when our world dramatically changed. We are all mostly working in offices when the pandemic hit, and suddenly our whole organization was working from home. And we recognized in that moment as a learning team, we have to respond to this. And as an example, we had someone on my team who came up with an idea of a way to build connection across the organization, and it went from idea to implementation in 2 weeks. And was it perfectly designed? Was it the perfectly polished, fancy, learning with virtual, resources and all those different things? No, but it was exactly what we needed in that moment, because we needed responsiveness, and we actually didn't have to overproduce it, because what we needed to create was conversation and connection. And that was where the success was. It wasn't a perfectly designed PowerPoint or anything like that. We created a space for connection, and very quickly. So I think that was one lesson that comes to mind. The other, and this might be going off in a little bit different direction, but it's just such a strong lesson that we've gained in the last year or two. And we alluded to this at the beginning, is we really deepened our understanding of the importance of connection. And in L&D, I think we understand the importance of human interaction, right? We use social learning. We like to get people in groups and help learners engage with each other. But through the pandemic, I think something we learned as learning professionals is we kind of have even a level of that, or an opportunity to broaden our impact by making human connection one of our goals. Whether your company is still working from home or not due to the pandemic, globally, we are fully in the era of remote and flexible work assignments, and technology is absolutely our lifeline. And in learning and development, we have unprecedented access to tools that drive self-directed learning. Keyword self. Associates can look up what they need without ever leaving their desks or setting down their phones. And those technologies are incredibly powerful and critical to how we function, but they do also they can minimize human interaction, and they could result in making us feel isolated. And I think something that we've really dug into in the last year is really thinking about how humans are social beings, and our brains are wired for social connection, and we need to feel a sense of belonging to thrive, to be healthy and happy. So to bring that full circle, what we learned in the pandemic is that we still absolutely need our digital tools. Like, they are our lifeline to continuing to function in this new environment. But we still need experiences that connect us as human beings. So for example, at Sentry, we have a learning program called Connection Works. And it is simply about bringing together our associates for 1 hour to focus on topics that create connection. So things like empathy or positive intent, or just talking about our surge capacity, and so on. And I think it's that combination of bringing together our digital assets and our human selves that help aid us, or will help aid us into success into the future.
Thank you for sharing that, Erika. I think you're not the only business who has faced these challenges. I see this all around, talking to so many business leaders and, learning professionals. What I'm taking is, a couple of takeaways from what you just shared is, that human connection is very, very important. And many leaders and even individual contributors face that problem where they are not in an office. And having that sense of belonging, having a sense of that teamwork, and having a sense of community, which is there in an organization, very, very hard to replace. So focusing on that aspect was something your team focused on and helped the business with. You talked about things not being perfect. I think very good advice. It has to be responsive. It has to be agile, meet the business requirements. And seems like you have pivoted to more and more digital tools, which are driving self-service. So all very, very good points. Very good. So I have to now look at the clock. So let's move to the rapid fire round. I'm going to ask you 4 to 5 questions. You can answer them in one word, or if you like, you can answer them in one sentence. So let me, fire away the first one. What strategy do you think is most critical to learning and development given the current skills gap?
I'd say weaving learning into everyday experiences and empower your associates as agents of learning. That was kind of 2 answers, but I feel strongly about both.
Sounds good. Not a problem. I think both are good. Which is more important to you, upskilling or reskilling?
I'll go with upskilling. I think we need to build those new skills to close talent gaps as we move into the future.
Looks like that served you and Sentry very well in terms of upskilling. Good. How do we transform employees from skilled trainees into self-directed learners?
I think we have to focus on building the underlying capabilities that accelerate learning. So things like critical thinking and curiosity and creativity, risk-taking, a growth mindset. I think if we start with those, we can encourage self-directed learning.
Really good advice. What are the key tenets of an effective learning experience to upskill employees and increase business resilience?
I can do this one in one word: connection.
No, that's awesome. Fantastic. That's what I was thinking as well. Very, very good. Erika, you are a leader in the L&D space. Who are the people you look up to? Any recent one that comes to mind and inspired you?
The first person that comes to mind is Gina Genero. She is the Chief Learning Officer for BMO. I've participated in some learning experiences that she's done some, recordings for, and I just find her way of thinking and challenging us to pave new paths just very inspiring. So I would call it.
All right, thank you, Erika. This is something that we ask all our guests of the podcast. This is the last question. What is the one word or phrase that comes to your mind about digital transformation and adoption?
I would say change the learning curve.
Got it. So, Erika, we have come to the end of the podcast. Before we sign off, what is the best way for our listeners to reach you? And we can include that, whether it's a email or if it's, trying to reach you on LinkedIn, we can include that as a note in our podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll make my LinkedIn profile available to you. And that is definitely the best way to reach out.
Thank you, Erika. Thank you for your time and all the valuable insights you shared with us. Thank you, listeners, for tuning into the Digital Adoption Podcast in this episode. Time to say goodbye. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yes, thank you for having me.